Chapter 15. A Mechanical Marvel. Mr. Sarasawa, what seems to be causing the delay? Simmons asked as he burst through the doors. Ren turned around from his multi-monitor station and stood up. The power is delay. The delay is the power, he replied softly. I'm sick of that excuse. We have billions of watts of electricity to draw from throughout our personal power grids, and you keep saying that it's not enough? Simmons growled angrily. That's why we need the power source from the hollow earth to perform a basic test? No, Mr. Sarasawa. To perform a basic test where it stands on its own and uses at least one of the weapons it has doesn't require the source. I want to see my mecha standing on its own 2 feet within the next 10 minutes, or you're gonna find yourself in the back seat of a Hong Kong police car. Understood? Simmons left the room in a huff as Sarasawa sat down and slowly shook his head. That man's patience will be his undoing, he muttered as he turned to his monitor. Behind the monitors were several glowing cables connected to a skull, but not just any skull. The skull left behind by the severed head of Ghidorah from its battle in the ocean with Godzilla 5 years prior. Having been harvested by fishermen from the sea and purchased by Alan Jonah, the skull had been acquired by Apex through a not-so-friendly transaction with the eco-terrorist. Parting with it was a bitter pill to swallow, but the resource and weaponry of Apex were not to be denied. Jonah never stood a chance. What happened to Jonah afterward is anyone else's guess, as Simmons actively refused to tell anyone the detail of that event. No matter, Ren whispered as he recalled his first attempt at getting the information. Ren pushed a button and a series of images connected on his monitors showing the Apex power grid system. You want it to stand and use a weapon? So be it. Ren began hastily clicking the keys on his keyboard, and the images began lighting up as various sections of the power grids were digitally connected to one another. Once they were all lit, he activated the power transfer, and the mecha's body jolted with electricity as power surged into it from the cables attached to its head, shoulders, and hips. The eyes flickered and flashed brightly before the light solidified. Meanwhile, you won't escape! Godzilla roared furiously, with his head above water and blue light, and sparks of energy arched widely above and through his spines, all the way down his back and tail. But suddenly, all went quiet in Godzilla's ears. The sounds of the seas, the echo of his roar, the wind rushing past, it all vanished, and in its place he heard a soft, tribal music resonating throughout his being. He knew immediately what this meant and slowed his pace before coming to a stop and floating waist deep and idling in the water as his tail swished left and right to keep him afloat. To the south, back from whence he had come, he saw a bright light shimmering on the nighttime horizon. The light grew brighter and brighter as the source grew closer and closer. Within moments, the music swelled as the body of the Queen of the Skies, her body glowing like the sun turning night into day for miles around them, rushed up and slammed her wings forward, bringing her momentum to a grinding halt. The massive gust of air rushed past Godzilla, who didn't flinch in its wake despite the waves of water rushing past his hips. Her wings beats slowed and she hovered around 200 meters above the water's surface. So you come. Of course. This is not your fight. Your fight is my fight. So it has always been. So it will always be. Godzilla took a breath and a puff of steam emerged from his nostril upon exhale. You remember our last encounter with the intruder. I will see no such sacrifice happen twice. It is not your place to make such a demand. The intruder takes wings. He enters my domain, and I will see it brought to Earth that you may finish it once and for all. Godzilla blinked slowly and turned his head towards Hong Kong. It feels different. It is different. His head snapped back to Mothra. How so? It no longer has a body of its own. It controls another, one not natural to the world we know. Godzilla snarled. Does it disrespect for this world no boundaries? Is that meant to be answered? Godzilla huffed. No. He he turned fully towards Hong Kong. If it takes wings, I will aid you in bringing it down. But once its feet touches Earth, the battle is mine to finish. Of course, my friend. Then let us away. This time, the intruder will breathe its last, natural or otherwise. Godzilla leaned into the water and raced forward, with Mothra soaring above him in a perfect scenic. Back inside the facility, the giant mechanical being had made it to its feet, with Ren staring at it with a sense of pride. A bipedal stance, a long tail, spines along its back, and a mouth pair of cold, dead eyes, staring perpetually forward without lids to blink. A mechanical Godzilla, red light pulsing through its body in aphanana to Godzilla's blue. Being mechanical, it was far more slender, and its joints adjusted for a human-like flow of movement. You may be the most powerful titan, big brother, but you fall to our creation. To my creation, he said calmly. Returning his gaze to his monitors, he typed away at the keyboard, and a massive door to the side of the mechanical Leviathan opened up, revealing a captive and a fully grown skull crawler. The creature scurried out from behind the door, with saliva dripping from its mouth. Starved and in desperate need of sustenance, it looked towards the mechanical Godzilla and lunged. Ren's mouth curled into a smile. The skullcrawler suddenly found itself being lifted into the air, with both its front arms being held out to the side, while the mechanical beast, its mouth, opened, revealing some kinds of tube, which began arcing with red light and energy. The skullcrawler flailed violently, but it was no use. The whip from its tail garnered no reaction, no flinch, no indication of pain, and at last the tube released a powerful beam which tore through the skull of the creature in the mecha's grasp before being trailed downwards, splitting it in half before being unceremoniously dropped to the floor. And within moments, the mechanical monstrosity lost power and all the lights dimmed. Ren stood up and walked to the window to look at the carnage, and while they found it disgusting and somewhat saddening to sacrifice an innocent creature such as this, if it meant shutting Simmons up for a few minutes, then it would be worthwhile in the end. Speaking of, that was fantastic, Simmons cried as he burst through the doors again. You see, I know you could manage. Apex Grid had more than enough juice to... The facility's power suddenly went out, including the lights in the room they stood in. Eh? Simmons muttered. We overtaxed the grid. It should return power shortly, Ren replied. Sure enough, a few seconds later, the lights flickered back to life. Ah, much better, Simmons said as he walked over to the windows. Look at that. It's beautiful, he said with an outstretched arms. My Mechagodzilla, superior to your originator in every way. Stronger, faster, more deadlier weaponry. You will be the instruments of humanity's liberty from the tyranny of the Titans. Is that what you think we face? Ren asked. Simmons turned around, looking rather incredulous. Mr. Serizawa, do you truly think that we do not live beneath the feet of the Titan's tyranny? How could we? Tyranny is brought by deliberate suppression and threats of violence. And what do you think it means when the Titans attack our cities, destroy the landscape around and within which we live, and constantly go wherever they please, leaving a trail of bodies in their wake? I call it natural selection. The Titans are trying to find where they belong. Yes, yes, I've heard that all before, but I believe it was the father who last said that. Was it not? Ren's voice caught in his throat, and he glanced away. Hmm, seems like you're more like your father than you thought. I am not like that man, Ren growled. Oh, Simmons asked with a sly smirk. Well, either way, Mr. Serizawa, I think that will do for today. Make sure Mechagodzilla is primed and ready to receive the power source we synthesize once my daughter completes the missions. Of course. Simmons left the room and Rand sat in his chair. Fiddling with the controls, he primed Mechagodzilla for the charge. Saving his work, he left through another door and headed down the corridor to his personal chamber, where he locked the door and sat on his bed and heaved a deep sigh while resting his elbows on his knees. I'm not like my father, he muttered. He was never around, but if I had a son, I would always be there for him. His fist clenched as he shook his head with tight lips. He didn't even come to Mother's funeral. He didn't care, he growled. Gojira was more important than family. Rand suddenly stood up and slammed his fist into his desk, cracking the wood. Again and again, he slammed his fist into it, causing the entire thing to splinter and fall in half before he turned his rage towards the metal wall. But a single slam of his fist into the metal sent a wave of pain through his hand and brought him back down to earth. Sitting back on the bed, gripping his fist in pain, unable to open it, he grit his teeth and looked at his now rapidly swelling and bruising hand. Why? He asked weakly. Why was Gojira more important? His eyes began welling up and he slouched forward. Gojira, Gojira, Gojira. That's all he'd ever talk about, he whimpered. The sound of a teardrop hitting the metal floor echoed through the room. I know my accomplishment in school basically meant nothing as a child, but he didn't even say if I did a good job. I'd have taken harsh criticism. I'd have taken harsh criticism over silence, he screamed as more tears fell. So why? Why does his haunt me? Why do I still care about this? I moved on. I severed all connections with him a long time ago. So why? Why does this still hurt so much? Rand wrapped his arms around himself as he slumped off the bed and to his knees, touching his forehead to the floor. Please, make it stop. He sobbed. Just make it stop. Rand continued crying quietly on the floor of his womb as an alarm bled to life throughout the facility. Elsewhere, in the Hollow Earth, the team had managed to follow Kong through the Hollow Earth to a massive mountain beneath the sun. of this subterranean world. Up ahead, as they slowed to a stop, with Kong walking forward in a bipedal fashion, were a pair of gargantuan doors, which made Kong look like a toy. Holy shit, Ford whispered. Incredible, Mark added. Is this it? Dr. Andrews asked. It has to be home. It has to be it, Dr. Lin replied. Kong's home, Dr. Chen said quietly. Maya nodded slowly, with a subtle smirk on her lips, and Jia smiled as she watched quietly, with a Kong doll clutched tightly to her chest, as Kong put his hand up to a red hand marking on the door. Chapter 16. I am home. Kong pressed both hands against the massive wall of rock and leaned forward, pushing with all his might. A grunt of effort escaped his clenched teeth, and the doors scraped open, pushing up a massive cloud of ancient dust into the air, and allowing the sun's ray to shine within this ancient hollow space for the first time in who knew how long. Cautiously, Kong took his first steps into this unknown domain. What is this? Coming in behind Kong at the slowest crawl they could manage, the team observed with jaws agape the majesty of this underground space. Along the ground of the entrance were carefully interwoven slabs of slate rock with cracks and crags along the surfaces. From wall to wall, they lay in a perfect puzzle-like formation, with each one settling in place next besides the next. From the air, they looked no bigger than a child's play toy, but compared to Kong, there were slabs of large. There were slabs as large as his entire torso, sometimes larger. But this floor was only the beginning. Ahead lay a massive open chamber, stretching for at least 2,000 meters from end to end, perhaps longer. All around the outside were intricately carved and layered archways, which absolutely dwarfed Kong in height. Behind each one seemed to glow an orange-red light, as if a lava pool or fall were behind each one. At the center of this marvel sat a massive stone tower, surrounded by smaller pillars, each one with a carved line through the center, which gave off a distinct dark dark blue glow. The walls of the cave seemed to have a similar things going on, with blue lights peeking through cracks and nooks throughout. But the central stone tower is what drew everyone's gaze. Beneath it was a massive circular arching in the ground, which obviously marked the spot as the most important section of the room. But why? Squared off slabs between Kong and the tower seemed to form a pathway leading to a massive stair, just as Kong's feet, which the ground had previously not noticed. Look at this, at the size of this place, Mark whispered. Yeah, it's beyond imagining, Jerry whispered. She tugged on Dr. Andrews' shirt to grab her attention. What's he doing? She sighed. Dr. Andrews looked out towards Kong and saw him clenching his fist with a slightly stiffened posture. Added to that, he was beginning to let off small grunts and barks which echoed through the space. He's calling, she said. Calling what? Maya asked. Not who, not what. Who, Andrews replied. Kong let loose a much louder roar, but like his shorter calls, this one could only return a hollow echo through the chambers. Dr. Lin, Andrews, Sarisawa, and Chan and Mark dipped their heads slightly, with Andrews fighting back tears as her lips tightened and trembled at the sight. Dr. Lin put a hand on her shoulder and have a light squeeze. You alright? He asked. She shook her head. He's alone, she sobbed quietly. Dr. Lin looked back to Kong and noticed that his shoulders had slumped and he was taking longer, deeper breaths. Kong's head hung low as he let out a whimper and sat down at the top of the stairs. This place, it smells and somehow feels like home, but there is nothing, no one here. The heaves lowered nearby, with everyone watching Kong intently. Serizawa, do you think he's really? Dr. Chen began. Serizawa nodded once, very slowly. Kong is home, but it seems he, like the others, is the last of his kind. Dr. Chen sighed softly and looked out at Kong, who was slumping forward with his elbow over his knee and resting his forehead against his arm. Home. His hands clenched into a fist. Home is not supposed to feel like this. He released a soft, mournful groan. Home is not supposed to feel so empty. Is he? Maya began. Crying. Mark interjected with a series of small nods. He is crying. As the heave came forward around the team confirmed Mark's declaration as they noticed the small puddles of liquid building between Kong's feet on the floor. They can do that? Maya asked. You're really surprised by this? Mark said. Of all the things the Titans have been shown to be capable of, you're surprised that Kong, one of the most intelligent and most emotionally cognizant of the Titans, is able to cry, right? Maya's lip tightened and she looked away dismissively while Mark shook his head. Meanwhile, Kong's head came up as he took in a deep breath and coughed out a final sob vocalization before pushing himself to his feet. There is nothing for me here. As he was turning to leave, Kong caught sight of something on the ground in the front of the central towers, and despite his desire to leave this desolate place, curiosity got the better of him, as well as something more. He began descending the steps with the teams in tow, as they all seemed to follow his lines of sight to the object. What's that? Joe asked, unable to see over the control panel. It's some kind of stick, Ford guessed. I don't think so, Serizawa stated. Kong walked up to the strange object protruding from the ground, but no, not the ground. It was protruding from a massive skull of a creature many times Kong's size. That exact identity of the creature was unknown, as it seemed to possess both mammalian and reptilian traits. But what drew Kong's attention wasn't the creature, it was that object. As he gripped it and hoisted it out of the skull, it took the form of a crafted axe, using what looked like. What an? Dr. Chen gasped. An axe? Dr. Andrews asked. Yeah, it's definitely an axe, but Dr. Lin began. Is that one of Godzilla's spine? Mark asked. It is, Sarasawa replied, mouth agape. An axe, and some kind of bone, like a femur, for the shaft, Dr. Chen added. Kong held the axe up and felt the weight of it in his hand. It's strong. He lifted the head into the air and held it against the light shining in from above. I knew it smelled familiar. It's from him. The axe came back down at Kong's side for a brief moment before he pumped it into the air and roared while beating his chest with his opposing hand. The water called to you, but this axe calls to me. If you attack again, I will not be defeated for a second time. Kong's roar shook the cavern for several long seconds before Everything finally calmed and his horse died away. What was that about? Maya asked. If I had to guess, his established dominance, Mark said. What? Just from picking that thing up? Ford asked. Yeah, primates usually displays their power and aggression when they feel a sense of superiority over the rivals. Their acts must have given him a confidence boost after his last battle with Godzilla, Mark concluded. Fascinating, Joe muttered. So what? So what? Monkey's got a tool, and now he's the king of the world? Maya asked. Shut up already, Dr. Andrew snapped. Honestly, you treat everyone and everything like it's beneath you. He's just a titan, Maya replied calmly. Andrew's mouth snapped shut with a clenched jaw, and Dr. Lin had to hold her back from reaching Maya, who smirked and shook her head. Maybe get her a leash? Maya was suddenly pulled around by a Lapon face, and face to face with Sarasawa, who stared directly into her eyes. When you disrespect nature, she will respond. Mind your tongue, he said quietly. Maya smirked and pushed him off, straightening her coat. Whatever. She had tugged on Andrew's shirt and pointed to Kong, who was now walking towards the central tower. But as they got closer, they noticed a little lip at the bottom of it. And as Kong approached and gave it a once over, he then promptly sat down with the axe held up at his side. It's a throne, Dr. Lin said. The heaves landed near Kong, and the crew all exited the craft cautiously, with a few hundred security members available gun ready, and checking the area to secure the perimeter. As he exited, Dr. Lin looked up and noticed hundreds of pairs of eyes on the ceilings, looking now at them, all, all from around and between the stalactites. Creepy, he muttered to himself. Back to the Apex Cybernetics headquarters in Hong Kong, Ren sat at his computer station, observing the specs of Mechagodzilla when Simmons entered the room, causing Ren to roll his eyes as he turned his chair around. What do you want? Such a harsh greeting, Mr. Sarasawa. I came to ask if there's been any change. None. I see. How unfortunate. Simmons glanced at Mechagodzilla's spec sheet and smiled. Magnificent, isn't it? Yes. Yes? That's all? What do you want me to say? I don't know. I suppose I just thought you'd be more excited for when the project is complete. Predicting how we feel is usually impossible. Not for me, Mr. Sarasawa. You'll enjoy yourself. I promise. Simmons left the room and Rand turned his chair around, clicking a single icon on his desktop. An image of Ghidorah's skull connected to an unseen ceiling and the mechanism therein appeared on the screen. Rand watched the slow impulsation of light through the cables and shook his head. This is wrong, he whispered. The longer he looked at the skull, the more he felt he was being mocked. What's wrong with me? He asked as he rubbed the back of his neck. He switched back to Mechagodzilla spec sheet, but the screen suddenly jerked back to Ghidorah's skull, which caught Rand off guard. What? He clicked back to Mechagodzilla spec sheet and it stayed there. Must have double tapped the icon, he sighed as he sat back in his chair. Suddenly, an alarm began blaring and live footage appeared on Rand's screen, which caused him to sit straight up with a gasp before replacing his surprise with a deep frown. Kita Ane, you've come, big brother. Godzilla's flashing spines tore through the ocean, leading into the bay, illuminating the coastline and buildings lining as he went. Mothra floating overhead and landed softly on top of a skyscraper as Godzilla rose up from the water, splitting a bridge against his back and stomping into the harbor, shaking the ground with every step. As he set foot on the solid ground and pushed himself out of the water, this magnificently lit city almost seemed to taunt him and his senses as he lost track of the feeling of the intruder. I know you're here. Show yourself. Godzilla roared, splitting the air and shattering glass for hundreds of meters around his position. He glanced over his shoulder towards Mothra, who remained silent and still on her perch. Godzilla huffed a growl and looked back towards the city with a snarl. You won't escape me, intruder, he roared while flaring his warning. Back in the hollow earth, Maya held a strange device in her hand as she paced about. I don't understand. He led us down here. So where is it? She grumbled. Suddenly, a light in the axe flickered to life, which caught Kong's immediate attention. What's this? He scanned the axe from top to bottom before sitting up a bit straighter. I know what this means, but how? Kong stood from the throne and his eyes locked on a very particular spot on the floor, a few steps away, which held an indentation perfectly fit for the axe as he was carrying. Setting it into the indentation, the light reacted and grew more intense as he seemed to leak through vein-like paths in the ground before hitting the dark blue rocky crystals lining the floor and the floor and walls in the chamber. The light spread to the other axes in other indentation and other Godzilla species spine set in the ground in sequences as everyone looked on. What's going on? Mark asked. It's the axe. There's some kind of resonance happening here, Joe replied. All eyes went to Joe's as he wheeled himself forward a bit. The radiation from the axe is synchronizing with something, some kind of power source, and it's drawing from it to get stronger. As the axe continued to flow around the circle, they illuminated a carving in the ground which looked identical to Godzilla, including his head and eye. All of them glowed with the same light Godzilla emitted naturally from his spine, and Kong watched warily as the light continued to grow intensive to intensify around him. The axe grew stronger, but the coloration of the light changed abruptly to match the dark blue of the rocky crystal formation in the ground, flickering before petering out and leaving the room in its original state. Above the ground, Godzilla and Mothra both snapped their heads and looked at one another. Was that? Godzilla looked down at the ground with a snarl. It's the ancient ground. I sense it's calling. But why? Something has disturbed it, and I will not stand for it. Godzilla's already flashing spines illuminated even more brightly as he lifted his head into the air, with a massive cloud of steam beginning to rise from his body as the ground and the building nearest him began to melt. No! Wait! Godzilla's head jerked downward as he unleashed his atomic breath straight into the ground on a continuous stream. In the Apex headquarters, Siemens giddily laughed at Godzilla's attack as the ground shook beneath his feet. Ho ho! Godzilla's responding to the source activation. They found it, he said with a clap of his hands. Now, all we have to do is wait for Maya, he cheered. In the Hollow Earth, Maya's team set a spider bot down on the ground, which made a beeline for a spot where the light shone through the rocky crystal of the grounds and sending a small laser beam into it from its belly. What are you doing? Dr. Andrews demanded. Extracting a sample, Maya replied flatly. This is an ancient ground. This is an ancient and sacred place. You can't just go around taking whatever you want from it. Actually, we can. And we are. So shut up and stand back. Maya snapped at the guards around her. Brought their Maya snapped as the grounds around her brought their weapons up. My father gave the order, and he always gets what he wants. This is now Apex property. The rest of the team was aghast as the little bot finished its laser cutting and extracted a sample, which brought it up into its body and began broadcasting the live collection of data regarding the power source back to Apex headquarters. Energy signal incoming, Mr. Simmons. We'll be able to recreate it soon, shouted one of his computer lackeys. Excellent, he replied. Sarizawa, meanwhile, stood nearby with his arms crossed and a deep frown on his face. Back in the Hollow Earth, Dr. Andrews and the team all began gathering against Maya and her man. This is a discovery of a lifetime and Kong's home. You have no right to just strip it for parts like you own it because you put your feet down here, Andrews yelled. Okay, shut her up, Maya ordered. The man brought the weapons and prepared to fire, but were interrupted when Kong roared and stomped his foot, sending everyone to the ground. It was also at this moment the entire room began to tremble, which caused everyone, including Kong included, off guard. The rumbling continued, shaking the walls and ceiling, which forced the strange winged creature on the ceiling to begin leaving their perches and flying around the area like a swarm of angry bees. Kong noticed their descent and felt so of them, trying to peck at his arms and chest. Flailing his arm in an effort to make them go away, he looked at the sky and roared again in warning. That's it! Go, go, go! Maya ordered as her device read the power transfer nearing completion. She and her man dashed to the heave, just as Simmons and the headquarters saw the power source scan reach 100%. Yes, there it is. Mr. Sarisawa, start your engines, he called with glee. The uplink is untested. Once we get online, Godzilla will come straight for us. He's been coming for us since the first day we awoke my creation. This will be nothing new. We should at least run a test to see how the mecha responds to the... Get in the goddamn chair, Simmons growled quietly. Meanwhile, Kong continued swatting at the flying creatures as the team on the ground fought to get back to the heath. Maya, in particular, watched one of her men get carried off, and her eyes went wide as dinner plates as she scrambled to get into the safety of the vehicle with the rest of the teams. They fired up the engines and punched it, but as they looked towards the light from outside the world, from beyond the doors, the heave suddenly shook violently as it was pulled through the air and up to Kong's face as he peered into the cockpit. No, she whispered. Kong snarled and began squeezing the vehicle. No, 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 Daddy! The heave and everyone inside were crushed by Kong's grip before he dropped it to the ground with a huff. Kong then heard a scream from behind and saw the humans fighting for their lives against the flying creatures. They couldn't reach the heave, and there was the nice little one, the girl with the doll of him. Kong roared angrily and dashed forward, only to be sent reeling back when a massive blue beam of light broke through the ceiling and slammed into the throne. The flying creatures dispersed, and Kong shielded his eyes as the beam continued to assault the room before finally vanishing in a flash of light. What the hell was that? Dr. Lin screamed. Gojira, Serizawa responded. Everyone on the heave, go, 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 Mark yelled as they all hurried into the vehicle and punched the engines. Through the holes created by the beam, Kong looked down and saw only darkness, but even though his sight failed him, his other senses did not. It was the one with the spiked back, the one who threatened him, the one who tried to make him bow. Somehow, he had used that breath of his to blast through the portal and into this space. You violated my home, Kong roared, grabbing the axe, now fully charged. Kong angrily stomped towards the hole, only to be hit in the shoulder by a falling chunk of rock. Looking up, He rolled off the way of another, larger one, before leaping into the hole to escape, using the axe to slow his descent. The team, meanwhile, dove in after him in the heave.